Learn everything about the poo-poo and the pee-pee from a physical therapist, pelvic floor expert on the Show Up Fitness podcast. If you want to become a successful personal trainer, listen up. Have a great day. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Show Up Fitness podcast. We are very lucky today to have Doc Courtney Johnson, and she is a Missouri State DPT living now in Arizona, kicking ass, doing a lot of great things. So really excited to pick your brain today. I know people hate it when you say that, but that's what I'm going to do because I want to learn about the PP area and everything that's going on down there.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here to talk about pelvic floor physical therapy, talk about personal training, talk about all of the things relating to working with females and males alike. I mean, everybody has a pelvic floor, and how we can best support their bodies with training and rehab and all of the things forever, for years to come.
That's great. And so I one of the things we're trying to do with our certification is just bridge the gap with therapy, sick care, healthcare, but also knowing where we need to stay in our lane. And unfortunately, today, so many trainers are seeking that next specialization. I want to get this certification. I want to get this certification so they can boost up their ego, whatever the hell it is. But when it comes to the pelvic floor, you need to go to the pelvic floor expert, and that's you. So instead of trying to get all these specializations, why not reach out to someone and have that person on your team? So when someone comes in and they have a certain situation that is out of your realm, you need to know that you can reach out to them. And a very common one that we hear a lot about, and I always, when people say, here's my teaching to my students, I say, if you don't know how to pronounce it, just say it fast with confidence and people believe you. So the Diastasis Recti one, how do you pronounce that?
Diastasis Recti.
See, I always say it fast and screw it up, but talk to me more
when
about
you say
that.
it fast, no one knows what you're even saying. So you're just like, you could just abbreviate, just be like, hey, the DR. Everyone else says DRA or DR. So
I don't want them to think I'm going to the Dominican Republic, though.
Hey, that sounds pretty nice right about now.
It does. So talk to us about the DR and what's going on.
So diastasis recti is essentially just splitting of the abdomen. It's a process of the linea alba, the connective tissue within the deep core, that splits during pregnancy. It's 100% normal during pregnancy. There's a lot of people and talk out there that you can prevent it. You cannot prevent it. There is no way to prevent it. You can have the strongest core of your life, 8-pack, right, going into pregnancy, and then you can still have that splitting because it's a growing abdomen. There's a growing child in there, fetus, if you will, that needs space. So why are we going to try to prevent it when we can just focus on the postpartum time period and rehab it? So diastasis is, like I said, normal for pregnancy, but it's also something that you can be born with. So I've actually treated children with it. Men can actually have it as well. And that's where you'll see men with like abdominal hernias and things like that, and even females with hernias as well. So it's a normal thing that can happen. Obviously it's not something we want, right? It's not normal, but it can happen. So as far as what to do about it, rehab, right? We got to focus on the deep core. But those individuals who have been born with literally a split in their connective tissue, those individuals are going to have a lot more of a difficult time than rehabbing it. And oftentimes that might look like a abdominal like separation repair surgery, where they go in and like literally repair the tissue and put it back together. You can have that postpartum, and you can have that for like a child or somebody later in adulthood that just is uncomfortable with the fact that they have a split in their abdomen. Hopefully that answers some of your questions on that. But I mean, I could go on and talk about how we would rehab it and things like that, but maybe.
Yeah, I love that. Can we let me just, we work a lot with, say, low back pain, and I feel trainers will try to simplify it by saying, oh, do a plank and a bridge, and all of a sudden you fix low back pain. Back pain isn't as complicated as it is. And I think that's where trainers need to be educated, knowing that it's a lot more complex. And so when you have a client who comes in with a specific condition or pelvic floor issues, it's like, yeah, there may be one exercise there's not one exercise that's going to cure everything. So that's what we need to learn more about is, what would that rehab process look like? And and how would we be
Yeah.
able to get in contact or know any contraindications for our clients?
Yeah. Well, in general, like if anyone is experiencing something as like low back pain or abdominal pain when they're doing core exercises, and that's common. Like people who have diastasis, they might actually have pain when they try to do a sit up or like engage their core because their core, like the integrity is just shot, right? So when you're looking at things like that, or if it's a low back pain issue, or if it's relatedly to pelvic floor issues, which is very common with diastasis recti because you're literally leaking energy, like you're leaking energy through the abdomen, and also probably leaking energy through the pelvic floor and low back pain. So those are the ways that other issues show up when you have a compromised core integrity in general. Like you'll get low back pain as a side effect. You'll get leakage, or you'll get pain in the pelvic floor, or pressure or heaviness, or these other symptoms because you have no core. So honestly, those things, yes, they're not contraindications. Like when I think of contraindication, I'm thinking more so like, oh, red flag, like stop everything, move on to, or refer out. But I would say those are warning signs that should and probably warrant like a further inspection by a physical therapist. Not warranting something like go get imaging, go get an MRI, because we all know MRIs can show things in healthy people and they have no pain, right? So we don't rely on imaging, even as physical therapists, we don't. But I would say something as if like, okay, if the trainer at hand does not really know or have a solid, you know, exercise routine for somebody with low back pain or with diastasis or with pelvic floor dysfunction, then maybe that is something where you do source out another professional that can evaluate that person at hand and be like, okay, this is what I would do with the patient. Give the trainer some advice, or hey, no, I think it's actually more appropriate if we just pull back on what we're doing, do more rehab, and instead of just trying to fight through it, like limited knowledge that you do have, and doing like things like you said, planks and bridges to just be the end all be all for back pain, or like strengthening the core, let's not go that route. Let's try to, you can do as much as you can symptom limiting, but as far as things that get more complex, I definitely think you should send them or give the patient or client at hand resources to go and get the help that they need.
So do you think there's some miscommunication between the medical professionals, like maybe the OBGYN, or well, how does my mind goes, how do so many trainers come across clients with pelvic floor and DR problems, whereas it feels like it should be just like a handoff always from the OBGYN, like that's part of the process. So is there something that's maybe lost in translation there, or why do you think so many trainers are coming across this problem from their clients?
Yeah, I definitely think there is, especially in the medical professional world. There is lack of referrals, I would say, in general, to the pelvic floor community, the pelvic floor physical therapists, because honestly, like some of these patients that go into their providers, maybe they don't want to explain to their provider, right? There, it's not an inviting space. There's not even time with their provider to be able to talk about what they want to talk about, because sometimes those appointments can last 5 to 10 minutes, and they're also quick, meaning like sometimes they're dismissed, right? They're like, anything else, and then the patient forgets what to say. And then I hear this a lot of women leave the appointment, they're like, oh, I forgot to even say that, because they're so caught up in these doctor questions that they're getting asked and they forget, or maybe they're distracted. So I would say it's not just the provider side, it's definitely the person at hand as well, and feeling comfortable to bring up the issues. But secondly, yes, there is a lack of and I think we're coming around, like it's getting better. There's more pelvic floor awareness, there's more attention brought to, hey, leakage and constipation and prolapse and all of these issues that people are now becoming aware, at least providers, OBGYNs, urogynecologists, urologists, primary care physicians, where they're like, hey, if you're experiencing these issues, whether it's a screening tool, as they're a new patient, or maybe it's something they're asking them in person, and they're giving them space to talk about those issues and sending them to where they need to go in general as a provider. But there's so many areas out there that still don't, right? There's massage therapists that maybe, there's hairdressers, there's other professions out there that work with women that women feel comfortable to tell them. So I think even as a provider, as a physical therapist, we need to do a better job at promoting our specialty to not only doctors, because doctors, they want to do it all too, right? They have medications for use, they have surgeries, they have their things, right? But if we advocate for our profession in other aspects, like hairdressers, nail salons, like, people go where the females hang out, right? And I mean, I'm not singling out females, there's males with pelvic floor dysfunction as well, but go to those areas. And for myself, like when I go and I got a photo shoot done like a couple months ago, and I've had my photographer refer me other clients because they brought up that they're pregnant and wanted to go to pelvic floor therapy. And she's like, "Oh, I have a pelvic floor therapist you need to go talk to." So that's what I try to do. And I mean, not everybody is the same. And I work with trainers and I work with, other types of people in the fitness world, but I try to market myself in non-fitness world, like estheticians and hairdressers, like I mentioned, because those are the people that are very close to their clients and their clients feel comfortable talking about the issues, right? So in general, I know that didn't answer already answered your original question. I went on another tangent, which I love talking about it, but there's so many ways we can advocate for the profession, and it's not just coming to trainers that these issues are at light, right? Or come to light, because there's so many ways that they can come to light that I don't think are being maximized, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love that. I'm a tangent guy, so I appreciate it. And you're talking
Yeah.
about some screening and some exercises. And I remember there was one time I was training a girl, and she was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months post pregnancy. And we were like a little group circuit. I was working at this gym at the time, and I had her, we're supposed to be doing jumping jacks. And she said she didn't want to do them. Me being an idiot guy, I didn't, put two and two together. I was like, "No, that's fine. You can modify them." And then she talked to me afterwards, and she said sometimes post pregnancy, it's common for her to have a leaky bladder. So essentially, you would be doing jumping jacks and you'd pee during a
Yeah.
session. Imagine how embarrassing that would be. And that would have been absolutely my fault. And so,
Yeah.
are there a certain percentage of females that post pregnancy that they're just going to experience that? And is there a specific screening tool, or should there be a protocol for trainers? So if I have a client and she's 3 months post baby, should I say, this would just be a good recommendation to go get checked out, make sure everything is working well, and then I can get some feedback from you. That could just kind of how we could keep that medical loop going.
Yeah. So I would say one to two in three women experience leakage after pregnancy. In general, that population, yes, but there are a ton of women who have never had babies and they still have leakage as well. I work with a ton of athletes who never had babies, they're in their low 20s and still leak. Powerlifters specifically, Olympic weightlifters, CrossFitters. Oh my goodness, those populations specifically, they do a lot. So as the trainer, yeah, on your intake sheet, right? Like, so when you're bringing on a new client, and I'm sure you have a health screening process, right? Maybe throw in a few questions down there and be like, "Hey, are you," and you don't have to ask specifically, like, "Do you pee when you jump?" But it can be more so like, "Are you postpartum? How far along postpartum are you? What was your fitness routine like, coming back from the baby? Like, is this the first time you worked out in 2 years since you had a baby, or 6 weeks, or, whatever that timeline looks like?" And then just another question, and leave it an open box and be like, "Are you experiencing any signs of pelvic floor dysfunction?" And in the parentheses, you can do like leakage, like urgency to pee, or feeling like something's going to fall out. And maybe it's just like a circle. Maybe they don't want to write it, but maybe they can just, "Hey, circle these if these apply," kind of thing. And I think that might go well, because most of the time when you're doing a health screening, they're open, they're willing to kind of talk about their weight and maybe their diet or lack thereof. They're willing to kind of talk to you about these vulnerable areas of their body, their insecurities, their goals. And I feel like it would be very appropriate to put screening tools in place that allow them to open up. So that way, when you are working with them on one-on-one or within a group setting, you're like, hey, by the way, you can just throw out there in the modification section of the workout, like, hey, if single unders aren't working for you, or double unders or whatever, like this is a modification. And you don't even have to say anything. You can just put it on the board and be like, modification for jumping, something like this. So that way, those women who are struggling with those things, they don't have to feel bad about talking to you about it and reminding you. Because I mean, if you're doing group fitness, it's going to be hard to remember all these people that have all these issues. So it might be just something where you just put a modification up there and be like, hey, those that can't jump, here's this. And then those women will feel comfortable being like, oh, thank you for giving me that modification and not singling me out. Because sometimes there are women that literally won't do anything, right? Like they won't want to talk about their pelvic floor related issues or anything like that.
So real quickly, is there any specific exercises that could be provided that would help immediately without overstepping our boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there is an issue at hand, working on the deep core, like deep transverse abdominis, like really encouraging women to find that muscle and give them exercises specific to just that muscle, sitting them down, making them lay down, making them actually engage that muscle, and then going through movements with them that make sure that movements or that muscle is engaged each time. Because, or if it's a one exercise, say it's just jumping, that's it, that's the only thing that makes them weak, then break down the movement pattern of jumping and making sure, you know, what's their breath routine like how are they breathing? Are they holding their breath? If they're holding their breath and they have a weak pelvic floor, they're going to leak. So teach them to breathe efficiently when they're jumping. So just breaking down the movement pattern itself and figuring out, is it their posture? Are they rib flaring? Are they hyperextending their low back? Like, are their ribs over their pelvis? Like, why can't we set up their bladder for a better length tension relationship with their core and get their core under control, and then they stop leaking? So those are the things that I look at when I'm working with women who have like a leaky bladder, for example, with just jumping. I'm looking at their posture, I'm looking at their breathing, I'm looking at their pelvic floor. And yes, while that's helpful to change like the pattern of the exercise, but don't forget the fundamentals. Like, you need to make sure you're engaging your core so it gets stronger over time. That way it's in all exercises these apply, not just jumping, right? Because then maybe she goes and does a box jump or a run one time and it also happens then. So you want that carryover effect too. So I would answer your question, deep core exercises, you can never go wrong. And if that doesn't work, if the patient has, or the client has no idea how to activate those muscles, then maybe give them a resource that they can go learn how to do that.
As a pelvic floor expert, I'm sure it's second nature for you with your cueing now. For someone who's a little new, you hear a lot of trainers will say things like, oh, brace, brace, brace. But the client's like, well, what the hell is brace, brace, brace? That's what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be some cues that you like to use that may be helpful for trainers and coaches?
Yeah. So I have a couple, and it really depends on the client at hand. Some of them, you know, if they're super beginner, right, they've never worked out a day in their life, I might use something like belly button to spine for deep core. I don't use words like brace or engage your core because women don't know what that means. And sometimes what they think that means is, oh, suck it in. And so they'll suck everything in. They'll like rib cage, they'll like, you know, make skinny, right? Like try to like squeeze past something and they're sucking in. And that is not engaging your core at all. That's literally just squeezing the crap out of your organs. So I try to think of like belly button to spine, or you're zipping your two hip bones together and then bringing it in towards the floor. Some people will say flatten your back on the floor. I do not encourage that cue whatsoever because that's a posterior pelvic tilt. And if you think about the transverse abdominis braces the abdomen, right? It tightens around the spine and creates stability in the whole entire abdomen. It does not rock the pelvis. So why are we teaching women and men to brace their core by posterior pelvic tilting all their might into the floor? at that point, you're doing kind of like a suck in motion. You're kind of just sucking everything in and posterior pelvic tilting. But we want to learn to control the core, whether you're an anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt, or neutral. So I really love belly button to spine. And I would say 90% of the time that works for people. I also make them feel it themselves. I have them put their hands on their hip bones and then migrate in towards their belly button. And I'm like, okay, belly button to spine. And sometimes they'll suck in, but I'm like, hey, no, we're breathing. Like your lungs didn't get invited to the party here. We're just working on your abs. So then they'll stop and they'll redo it and they'll realize the difference between those two. And when they feel it as well, that also helps. So I'm like, hey, what do you feel in your hands? And they're like, oh, like I feel something push into my hands, or I feel it's hard underneath my hands. And then I'm usually like, yeah, that's your muscle. So if they don't feel anything, and then I'm like, okay, we're still not getting it. And then we just break it down all over again. Sometimes too, you can use a balloon to help. I often don't do that because people don't have balloons laying around, but I would say belly button to spine and then zipper. That's usually a big one for me.
How about, you can tell me I'm an idiot, this one doesn't work, but what about, I tell my clients, close your eyes, pretend like Casper's in the room and he's going to punch you in the next 10 seconds and you don't know what it's going to be. And so that's trying to absorb the force of someone, giving you a little jab to the gut.
I usually do that too. I'm like, hey, pretend I'm about to punch you in the stomach right now. And then I'm usually like, huh, that like quick reflex. And I kind of make that noise too. And usually they get that too. But the only thing I don't like about it is because people will associate that with holding their breath. Yeah. And we don't want a breath hold with it. So if you can use that cue to get them to understand, hey, those are the muscles I want you to contract. And then usually they're like, oh, light bulb, right? They're like, oh, I understand. And then I go back to the belly button to spine and then they find it. But I don't use that as a way to like initially do it because they'll suck in, right? And we don't want that. We want them to be breathing with the abdomen because as you breathe, you transverse moves with it. So we need that.
I like that. I like that a lot. And so we're anatomy nerds over here at Show Up, and we like to really drill our trainers to make sure that they know their anatomy. And when it comes to the pelvic floor, there are a lot of muscles there. And I know obviously we're not going to become doctors in anatomy, origin, insertion, but there are some muscles that are more, I mean, would you even use the word, is there an agonist for the pelvic floor? Is there a main pelvic floor muscle that is, being not bullied, but picked on when we have these issues like, pelvic floor dysfunction?
Yeah, I mean, you have like 4 layers of muscles, right? You have the superficial pelvic floor muscles, and then you have the deep pelvic floor muscles. And the deep muscles are, I group them, I mean, we all group them together as the levator ani group. And that lies like 3 or 4 muscles, if I remember correctly. There's a bunch of them, but it doesn't matter in terms of what a trainer needs to know and it matters for a physical therapist, yes, but the fibers that blend together in the pelvic floor, and you're never going to be able to assess as a pelvic floor physical therapist one muscle from the other. Besides the muscles probably as far back as possible that attach just to the tailbone. But in general, their origin and assertion is all within the pelvis, pubic bone to tailbone and sit bone to sit bone. It literally is a big hammock. If you just think of the pelvic floor like a hammock, it's at the bottom of the pelvis. That's it. And it attaches everywhere on the pelvic bones. So if you aren't paying attention to this area, like it's wild to me that nobody talks about the pelvic floor because who cares about the biceps? They're not functional. Like we can lift our arm, we can do all of these things. But the pelvic floor, nobody talks about them. And they are like the most vital parts of our body because they keep us continent. Like if we're not paying attention to that area, we would be leaking all over the place, right? So I like always talk about them because they're so important. And when they function correctly, we will never have problems. The biggest thing most people struggle with is range of motion to those muscles. And that goes with breathing. So you asked about an agonist of a muscle that works with it, the diaphragm, the deep core. They are all connected. When we say your core, like people think of what, your rectus abdominis, your obliques. Not at all. That is not your core. Those are your abdominal superficial muscles, right? So that's like your upper trap and your trap muscle, all of your trap on top of your rhomboids and on top of your levators and on top of the serratus muscles in your back, right? It's the same thing for the abs. So we need to focus on the deep core, the pelvic floor, and the diaphragm when you're dealing with anything in the abdomen, really. I mean, pelvic floor related issues too. So
now I love challenges, and we do challenges like dead hang challenges and push-ups and so forth, how much you can bench and squat. But is there some legitimacy to being able to hold your pee? Is that something that we should all be able to do? Like you hear strengthening of your, now is that going to be your urethra, or it's your pelvic floor muscles? What are those muscles that are controlling the start and the stop, and start and the stop?
The start and stop of flow and urine are your pelvic floor muscles, but you also, I mean, there's sphincteric function there, but you also have the inner and exterior sphincteric muscles as well. So within the inside of the bladder, as well as, or the urethra urethra. And then your bowels, they also have their own sphincteric muscles, but your pelvic floor are your like, oh gosh, hang on for dear life. Like they're kicking into, right? So you have some 2 layers of support there to help things out, but there's no holding time, right? I mean, ideally everybody should be able to hold their bladder for 2 to 5 hours, like depending on water intake, of course, but you should only be urinating 6 to 8 times a day. That equates to every 2 to 5 hours, given I don't know, probably like 50, 60 ounces of water intake. If you're drinking a gallon of water a day, I drink a gallon of water a day and I still pee every 3 to 4 hours. Like you can drink a lot and train your bladder to hold large volumes. You should be able to hold up to 600 milliliters of urine. So while there's no award or reward for anybody to hold their bladder for a long time, because we don't encourage that. We don't want to cause any pain, because that is there's a ton of bladder conditions that can happen from urine retention. And that's why a lot of people later down in life, they have urgency issues, retention issues, because of habits that they did when they were younger. So we don't want and encourage anybody to hold their bladder, but you should be able to hold it for 2 to 5 hours. Like you shouldn't be urgently going every 30 minutes.
That's fascinating. Exactly. And just to clarify, I was making reference to when you start peeing, you should be able to stop your pee, right?
You should, yes. And if you cannot, then you should see a pelvic floor PT.
That's what I was referencing. So
you don't want to do them on the toilet. You'd never want to stop the flow of urine on the toilet. It's a restroom. You are resting on the toilet for a reason. But in case you need to stop the flow of urine, that is a Kegel contraction. That's a pelvic floor muscle contraction. And you should be able to do that. That is a normal function. So,
okay, yes. That's what I was getting to right there. And so when you look at the Kegels, when you do those exercises, is that specifically the pubococcygeal muscles that we're training?
You're grouping them all together.
Getting all
all of them are yeah. But when you're doing okay, so if we're gonna get technical here.
Yes, let's get technical.
If you are doing a stop of flow on the toilet, sometimes people who do not know how to actually engage their pelvic floor muscles, all of them collectively, they will just use the superficial pelvic floor muscles. Those outside muscles that basically kind of stop the urethra from emptying. However, when you do a Kegel, you want to include the whole group. So you need to do a urethral, vaginal contraction, as well as anus. Like you got to get it all. And if you're not, people are like, well, I don't know. How do I isolate the vagina versus the anus? And it's like, we don't want to. We want to get it all, because 60 to 70% of the pelvic floor lies posterior. So if you're not including the anal side of things, you're not recruiting all the muscles. So when I teach people how to do a pelvic floor contraction, I'm like, yes, squeeze your anus as well. Because if you're not getting it all. And this is like not weird to talk about. I hope people listening do not think this is weird, because this is normal. This is anatomy. We are human beings that have these muscles.
I was doing the exercise as you were talking, because guys, you can do it too. We don't have the but we have the penile, and it's
the same thing for everybody. But I want to say these need to be in isolation. Like make sure glutes are silent. Make sure inner thigh muscles are silent. Make sure, I mean, the core will kick on a little bit. Like you can't do it without the core. They're always invited to the party, but we don't want to overdrive the core, because if you're really contracting your core, you're just compensating. And that's okay for somebody that doesn't know how to do a pelvic floor contraction. Like we encourage co-contraction when someone wants to learn it, right? That's okay. And then we pull it back later. So if you're somebody who does know how to do it and you're doing a contraction, make sure your glutes and everything aren't contracted too. Cause I'll see people do it and I'm like, when you're doing a Kegel, no one should know you're doing a Kegel. Like no one should be. So if I see you up and down doing your Kegels, I know your glutes are on too. So cut it out.
And that's so important with the neurological communication there. And so
exactly.
while you're listening to this right now, you need to post this in your story. I'm doing my Kegels without my ass raising, because these are exercises that we should be doing every day, just like breathing drills.
Absolutely.
We're getting into ice baths. Like we're not talking about Kegels, and you can be doing these regularly. And not only is it going to help with your bladder, but it also helps with orgasms as well.
Exactly. But on that note too, like Kegels are important, pelvic floor contractions are important, but if anything, relaxation is more important, especially if you are an athlete. I would say more than anything, everybody has pelvic floor tension and does not know how to relax their pelvic floor muscles. So don't just go around all day doing your Kegels and pelvic floor contractions. Like make sure you relax them too. Like you have to relax those muscles, because if you think about it like a bicep, and we want to strengthen the biceps, right? We're not at 90 degrees bicep curl doing 90 to 180, right? Like that, you're not going to grow your bicep by doing that. So you got to make sure that muscle is fully lengthened, fully relaxed, and bring it through its full range of motion as a contraction, and let it relax all over again before you do every repetition. Otherwise, you're just doing half bicep curls, and like no one's trying to get strong muscles doing half bicep curls. So don't do that for your pelvic floor either.
I really like that, because I've seen people who will try to contract their pelvic floor and they will tighten up, and like they'll squeeze their ass and then they'll see the rectus abdominis contract. And it's like, whoa, Tiger, settle down. We got to really focus. And that's that neurological side of things, really focusing on just that contraction. I like what you said earlier, the superficial all the way down deep. And when you think of that hammock, you can really picture this sphere and the spectrum of what you're trying to recruit right there. And that's something.
I mean, the urethra is very anterior to the body. So if you're just recruiting those superficial muscles, like you are missing so much. And then people are like, well, Kegels don't work for me. And it's like, are you doing them right?
That's it right there.
Yep.
Just like with people who, they'll look at certain exercises and that exercise doesn't work for me. It's probably because you're not doing it properly. And the same goes with this. So
yep, exactly.
All fascinating stuff. And we are now nerds with the pelvic floor, and I appreciate this. And the last thing I had about would be for reach outs for trainers trying to get connected with a pelvic floor specialist. What would be some vocabulary or professionalism? One thing that I always harp on trainers is we're looked at as not very professional. And I think that's because we lack the ability to talk the part and just knowing anatomy, but also just the professionalism from, not addressing people's names and using the proper context and saying, hey, bro, or hey, or, just being very professional on the reach out. So have you had trainers reach out to you in the past, and have they been successful? And if you haven't, what would that reach out look like?
Yeah. I have a ton of connections with trainers. I have a ton of trainers that follow me, that want to just learn pelvic floor health for their own clients, which I absolutely love, because more than anything, like people need to be educated and people need to know why. Sometimes people don't care to know why, but I think it's more important for people to understand why they're doing what they're doing, because then it clicks. It's a light bulb inside them and they're like, oh, like now I understand why I need to do this exercise, right? There's that buy-in, there's that compliance. So for a trainer to reach out to a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a physician, whatever, I think it's obviously appropriate to, grab their attention by their name and whatever their professional alliance is, like before their name, and just creating a great relationship. Like, obviously, I will say some trainers reach out and say, what course should I take? Or like, hey, can you, to come talk to my PT class? Or, they'll ask questions that are like not providing value. like they want like give, right? Like take, but they're not like offering value in exchange. So I think that if you're a trainer reaching out, I think that maybe providing value if you want something from that provider themselves, right? Whether it's a consultation call, whether it's a talk to come talk to their athletes or whatever. I think it's just respectful to approach them appropriately, but also provide value to them. Because if they are spending their time, their energy, their resources on you as a trainer, I think that obviously you always want to provide value and not just take all the time. And in regards to that, I don't think that I think I can speak for most providers that they're willing to help and they're willing to provide training and they're willing to provide advice on things as long as there's like a reciprocal, respectful relationship and it's not just one-sided kind of thing.
That's a great way to build the medical team where trainers should be competent enough to have professionals on their team. So when a client comes in, we don't have this jack of all trades approach. I can do everything. It's like, okay, I'm trying to help you. That's why we got into this. And so tell me more, update our physical activity readiness questionnaire, have the proper questions on there. And if you feel that there's something that's out of our lane or a red flag, so, this is perfectly normal. I have an expert on our team. I'm going to reach out to them and we're going to see how we can help you. And all that does is build you up so much more versus overstepping your boundaries. And now you could potentially be doing things that are not in your scope or even hurting people because.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important thing to note is practicing within your scope for sure. Like I mentioned, I was on my story talking on a TED rant is what I call them, about trainers soliciting and fear mongering women about diastasis and Kegels and pelvic floor core strengthening. And I see it all the time on TikTok and Instagram. They're like, point of view, you do this one exercise for your pelvic floor and you stop leaking. And it's like, what? Like this one exercise, I'm sure you've seen those like kind of float around Instagram. And it's like, no, that one single exercise is not going to help them stop leaking. And it's like, why are you soliciting and fear mongering these women and trying to make money and monetizing your programs when it's like, these women might have extra like issues at hand. And oftentimes with pelvic floor related issues, like they're not alone. Like just because they have leakage, like why do they have leakage? We don't just strengthen the core and their leakage automatically goes away. Maybe they have a bladder issue that needs entertained. Maybe they have a core issue. Maybe they have literally a neurological malfunction or miscommunication that needs completely remotor programmed. And that's why they're having the issue. Like you can't, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk about it. Like that's just it. And like you said, refer out because it does make us mad in our profession because oftentimes, like, I mean, it's okay. Like we clean up trainers' messes sometimes, like we clean up doctors' messes sometimes. And it's like, I'm sorry, somebody told you XYZ before, but that's not true. So it is important to stay in your lane and refer out. And honestly, you can develop a great collaborative effort because we rehab. Oftentimes we're not performance trainers. We're not trainers. Like we're not going through this strength cycle with these clients. Like, hey, I just want to get them better so we can send them back to you and you can do your job. Like, that's it. Like, let's just have a great relationship back and forth, but you don't need to advertise the rehab because that's not in your lane. And I think I can speak for a lot of PTs in that area. I got some heat yesterday on my profile from other PTs about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because there's so many certifications that's their whole model is fear mongering. So you have upper cross syndrome, you have this, or you're overactive and we need to fix you. It's like we're not broken. And when you understand movement and it begins with the brain. And I was telling you before the call that we just recently partnered with Lifetime, and when we were in Miami, we go over the rotator cuff, and I'll talk about the rotator cuff of the hip because those deep six rotators are really important.
Yeah.
You got to have a new name for the pelvic floor, like the rotator cuff of peeing or something. But it's so there's more awareness that people know that's good to know this stuff, but there's issues that a lot of people, and I can only imagine for a lady to come into a meathead trainer and he's sitting there all jacked and is on his phone with his Gold's t-shirt and it's the assessment process, and she's probably just like, I don't want to tell this tool what's going on with me. And the questions that they're asking are very superficial, like, oh, you have bad posture, we got to fix you, and let's go do the squat. And it's like, oh, you got to ask better questions and you got to really dig
Absolutely.
deep. And then if something does happen, and that's where the business side comes in, where trainers don't think about relationship building and networking. But if I send you clients, you'll more than likely reciprocate by saying, hey, I have
Yep.
someone who just came in, go over there. And it's a happy marriage.
Yeah.
And that's how it should be. There should be more synergy within not only physical therapy and trainers, but dietitians and doctors and
Yep.
chiropractors and everything.
100%.
So
I think if people live in this like take world, right? Like they're like, just give me everything and send me people, but like there's no reciprocation. And honestly, like what you put out is what you give in, so, or what you get. So like if you're not reciprocating your services, and like I work with a ton of birth providers, like doulas, midwives, like dietitians, mental health counselors, trainers, like pregnancy postpartum trainers. And it's like, hey, like we're just here to reciprocate business back and forth, because like I do what I do and I want to be at the top of your mind when you have an athlete in front of you that has all of these issues. I want to help them, but I'm not here to strength train them. Like CrossFit trainers, for example, like they want to do it all.
mhm.
CrossFitters, like coaches there, powerlifters, like powerlifting coaches, no, they don't do it all. They're okay, outsourcing, giving people rehab and stuff like that. But CrossFit trainers specifically, like they try to do it all, right? Here, you need to do this mobility exercise, and that's going to get rid of your hip pain. And it's like, no, probably not. Probably the 5 million squats that you program this week is probably stop doing that and that'll get rid of their hip pain, like kind of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it's just like we like working with other professions, and I think that it's appropriate to refer out when you need to and stay within your lane. And I think you're going to get more business that way as well, because I mean, there are people who are on my shit list that I'll probably never refer a client to, just because of the way they screen, the way the lack of detail and all of that. So
Now,
yeah.
what are your thoughts on this? I'm not a big believer when people reach out to me, because all the time they'll say, what certification should I get for this? And they'll say
Oh,
pre-postnatal. And I'm almost like in the camp where it's like, just learn the anatomy, but why not link
mhm,
up with that actual expert and then just refer
mhm,
out versus spending $600? And now you're going to have this almost like this excitement that you want to help everyone who has a little bit of this dysfunction. And so then you're overstepping your boundaries. So why not take that
yeah,
$600 that you're going to go waste on a certification and go take a physical therapist out to dinner, pick their brain, pay for
mhm,
dinner, pay their hourly rate. And then that relationship that you're going to be establishing from
that
there on out is going to be way more rewarding,
that
but also helpful for the client and overall
yep,
everyone. Would you agree?
absolutely. That is like exactly what we love. Like I don't I don't need my dinner paid for, but like that respect, like that's what we're after. It's like, hey, that reciprocal environment. If you want to pick my brain for an hour to benefit your clients, and now we have a great relationship, like that's what I want more than anything, because now I trust you. And hey, I'll even give you my personal phone number, where you're like, hey, I have this patient or this client in front of me and they're having back pain when they do bridges. Like, is there something I can do? Yes, I would love to help you, because we already have a great rapport build, where I could just easily text you back and say, yes, try, XYZ. If that doesn't help, maybe set up a call with me or whatever. I'm willing to help in those aspects. So, but as far as certifications, like there are so many great certifications out there for pregnancy, postpartum, for trainers to take. The thing that I have, which I love, like I love that side of things, but the things that they learn in those courses are great, right? It's superficial pelvic floor knowledge. Like, hey, these are signs and symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction. Where I get tripped up is that when those trainers feel qualified to treat people who are pregnant and peeing themselves, and they're like, I can help you. It's like, what? Like, why do you, just because they're pregnant and you are pregnancy trainer doesn't mean that you can help them with their low back and SI joint pain and their leakage. Like, those are things that you can be mindful of, but it's like, don't solicit yourself as a trainer who is like, I can help you stop peeing your pants. And it's like, do you think that that client at hand, like maybe they can afford you better because a trainer versus a doctor, like I get the price difference, but it's like, don't stay in your lane, period. If I go on a TED rant, but just stay in your lane. And like I said, reach out to a PT on your team that's like, hey, let me go grab my PT. Let me help you with this issue. We'll get it quick, like fast. We'll get it done fast. We can get you evaluated. We can get you on a plan and get this taken care of you quick, versus problem solving yourself as a trainer.
And don't listen to what you just said, trainers. Make sure to buy them dinner. Buy them dinner. They always appreciate that. I work closely with the pre-ab
I like
guys.
tacos.
There you go. See, and if you showed up with a bunch of tacos, you're not gonna be like, no, I don't want those. I always bring them. I work closely with the pre-ab guys. I always bring them tequila and whiskey, and they're always like, told you not to do that, but they always drink it. So
I know. I'm not gonna turn down tacos and a margarita for dinner. But yeah.
I love that. Well, where can everyone find you, Doc?
I'm on Instagram. I got all the social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Also have a website, the Female Athlete DPT, Doctor of Physical Therapy is what that stands for. And then the Female Athlete Doc on social medias.
Awesome. I appreciate your time. This was awesome. Loved hearing about this. And if you guys have any questions, make sure to reach out and let's help our clients. So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.